What is going on, everybody, and welcome back once again. My name is Jordan, also known as JMonster. I want to thank you guys for joining me for our second Third Age Reforged army creation video. Now, many of you have requested Gondor as our next faction, and I really wanted to do and maybe I'm being a little bit misleading here by having Gondor as the first faction, but this is the default setup. Now, many of you wanted to see Gondor, but there are two factions that are being changed a lot in the upcoming stat hotfix. The first one was Misty, which we covered last time, and the second is Harad. So today we're going to be doing Harad. Go ahead and we're going to click on them right there. But Gondor will be our next faction, I guarantee it, because they got some pretty cool comps, I think, that have opened up to them since 0.95 has launched. We've had a lot of like balancing patches and stuff. So Gondor's a really interesting faction now, and I actually spent some time making comps with them yesterday. So don't worry, that's going to come out, and it is going to be glorious because I've spent a lot of time thinking about their army creation. But in any case, let's go ahead and let's start making some armies with Harad. Alright, now before we start making armies, let's talk a little bit about the way that Harad is changing in the upcoming balancing pass. Now this is, I think I mentioned this a moment ago, but this is on the test build, so all the prices and the stats are where they should be, but it's not necessarily going to be reflected in the unit card. So I will talk about stats where they're relevant, and yeah, where there's going to be a little bit of discrepancies between the cards that you see there and what the unit stats actually are. So the first of the targeted changes, I don't think they're overall nerfs, I think they're just kind of changes that are ultimately for the better. We're targeted at the Southron units. So across the board, they are 600, and they have a base armor value of 5. But they have gone down in size. Now previously, the Southron Warband were 200 each, 200 men in the unit each, and they are 550 cost. The problem with these units is that because they are AP, it adds so much value to them that they were basically Harad's offensive and defensive lineup all rolled into one very affordable package. So that's changed now. They are a little bit more expensive, and their unit caps have gone down quite precipitously. I can see that they're limited to 3 now, whereas previously the Southron Warband were limited to 6, which was huge. And I believe the Southron Pikemen were at 4, but now they are at 2. So they form more of a mid-tier core rather than being the majority of your army. And that's a good thing because some of the Muhad units have got some changes as well. The Muhad Warriors have got extra damage. The Muhad Beast Tamers, I believe, went down from 600 to 525, so they're much more affordable now. Muhad Warriors went up in price from like 450 or something like that to 525 to reflect that they are a little bit better, and it just makes sense not to... We're trying to make Harad a little bit less cost-effective, so these units kind of did need to go up in price. Otherwise, we just run into the same problem in a different with a different unit. And the Muhad Berserkers are still at 550, but they are pretty strong for what they are. So the Muhads can very much form the core of the Haradrim tribesmen. I think that's kind of appropriate because the Muhads are very, very wild-looking. And previously, they were kind of more specialist units, but they've kind of since branched out a little bit. So now you can use Muhad Warriors, up to 4 of them, along with 4 Pikes and 4 Muhad Berserkers. And we're actually going to try and make a predominantly Muhad army, just as a kind of an interesting concept, and we're going to try and make that viable, just to kind of show you that Trollmen aren't necessarily the only option for Harad. But speaking of Trollmen, one of the other targeted changes, and this one is, I think, an overall nerf, was at the Champions of Nafarat, which were previously at 100 men in the unit. It was way too much. So now they're down to 80, which is a nice change, and the Demons of the Desert also have changed a little bit. Now, they went from 90 men in the unit, yeah, 90 to 75, and their ammo was decreased from 4 to 3, but to compensate a little bit, they were also given 2 more melee skills. So instead of the 10 skill they have there, they have 15, which is what their overall defense kind of shows there. So still a good unit, still cost effective, can still do a ton of damage with their javelins, and they're still very strong in melee, but they're not ridiculous. I mean, it was a lot of Demons of the Desert to get for 1100, so yeah, they're a little bit more reasonable. But I think that's the majority of the changes. No, actually, Serpent Guard. Serpent Guard got a small, well, a fairly big change and a small buff to their melee defense. They went from 4 to 5, but they also went from 200 men in the unit to 160, and that was mostly a logic change. So I want the Serpent Guard to be useful, and I want them to have a place in the roster now that the Southrons have kind of been brought out of the spotlight a little bit. But it was weird for an more elite, kind of higher end mid-tier unit to have more men in a unit than some of these Muhad units like the Beast Tamers and the Berserkers. So instead of really jacking up the Muhad numbers to be 228 to match the Muhad warriors, I decided that it would be better just to kind of bring down the Serpent Guard, because I think that overall this way Harad is going to feel a lot more balanced. And again, we're not going to run into that problem where they're just so cost efficient and they've got so many numbers that that it becomes a problem again, because we don't want to keep releasing balancing patches like this. We're doing it now just because, I mean, this is the way that development kind of works in every game that I've played, and there's usually a lot of support, especially for competitive games like this. Blizzard games do this a lot, and they do it a lot more than we will. So this is going to be the last kind of patch, I think, and the last kind of stab we take at balance before major content patches start arriving, and that's going to be in quite a lot of time. So hopefully this really gets it right. But yeah, so we're not going to be doing that all the time, but we want to make sure that everything is, all of our ducks are kind of in a row. But in any case, let's take a look at some Harad armies. Now, as I mentioned, I kind of wanted to play around a little bit with a Muhad army. So let's see what that might look like. So let's try playing with some Muhads, like some Berserkers and some Beast Tamers stuff. We'll use them as kind of the core of our army. Let's also take... Well, we can't have a solely Muhad... Oh, maybe we could. Let's try this. Let's try these two units here, the Muhad War Beasts. Maybe a couple units of Beast Hunters as well. And let's support them with, say, some Haradrim Raiders. We'll also take some Southron Archers because they are actually really important. And let's take a unit of Champions of Nafarad as well. We're going to try and break away from that Muhad kind of only thing a little bit, just for the sake of making this a viable army. And let's see, what do we got left now? We've got a fair amount of skirmish power. We can use the Haradrim Raiders pretty effectively, I think, to supplement the cavalry that we do have with the Muhad War Beasts and such. And they're really strong with their 3 HP. They are quite low in number though, so they are vulnerable to being swarmed. So maybe a little bit more options in terms of cavalry is a good idea. So we don't quite have enough for Serpent Guard, but we do have enough for some Muhad Beastmasters, who are a nasty skirmish cavalry. So if we're going to support the Muhad War Beast, we're going to do it with some... oh wow, we don't quite have enough for that either. This is a tough choice we have here. Let's maybe go for a unit of Haradrim Archers. This is a tough one. We could get a couple units there of the Haradrim Spearmen and use those to support our cavalry, use them a little bit more offensively, while moving in with our Muhad units. We do have a lot of skirmish power here, especially in the mid-range with the Muhad Beast Hunters. Have some nasty Champions of Nafarad, a lot of elite support there, and they also do Inspire, so it'll be useful to keep them with some of the Muhad warriors, although it wouldn't really be necessary because the Muhads have really high morale values with their 14 morale. And that's because they have the Impetuous trait, which can make them charge without orders and makes them a little bit less responsive when trying to pull them out of melee. But yeah, they really do benefit from that extra morale. So if you're going to get these guys stuck in, leave them there, and they'll do pretty well for you. But that's an interesting Harad army there that's really Muhad heavy. And I actually kind of like it. I think that it's definitely a competitive army, that there's potential there. Some weaknesses, let's think about that. Well, obviously the armor is going to be the weakness. Not a ton of elite units, so it is a little bit low on elites, and the cavalry is vulnerable to being swarmed just because you're really relying on the Muhad War Beasts for a lot of your killing power. They are strong lancers with that charge bonus, and they can stand up to damage quite well with their 8 armor, which is probably one of the higher armor values that Harad has in general, and the 3 HP. But again, those numbers really do play against them. So, and you're a little bit light on the skirmishing power, like the mainline skirmishing power as well, with only 2 companies of the Southron Archers. But you do have the Muhad Beast Hunters that you can supplement them with once you get close. So I recommend being very aggressive with this army, and really, it's good to be aggressive with Harad in general, given their low defensive values. So a lot of the armies are going to be about getting in and overwhelming your opponent with numbers and with ferocity and with the damage that Harad can bring to bear. And I think this army kind of exemplifies that approach. There's a lot of high damage units here, the Muhads and things like that. But let's move on to another army. I want to make an army without trollmen. So we'll make armies with trollmen, but for now, let's try making one without the trollmen. So let's rely on our Serpent Guard because they got a nice buff couple of Southron warband there as well. Let's dip into the red a little bit for the Southron archers. This is probably going to be more of a balanced army that is capable of skirmishing at length for a little while, at least trying to use up some of the enemy skirmishers' ammo, and you can really do that quite effectively with the 5 armor on 3 companies of the Southron archers there. Having them all nice and spread out can do really well for you. So we've got our basic infantry corps covered, our cavalry support covered, and our skirmishers. So now we need to really decide what we want to have on our main line. And I think the Muhad Berserkers are a really cost-effective pick, so we'll take about 3 of them there. And maybe a couple units of the Beast Tamers as well to kind of round out our infantry force and to give us a little bit of staying power in the center, because the Serpent Guard are vulnerable to being run down. So let's see, what else can we bring here? We got another company of Serpent Guard that we can bring potentially. Now, do we want to have the Muhad Berserkers, or do we want to maybe substitute another unit of Southron Warband in there, and then round it off with another company of Spearmen to help defend the flanks, maybe support the cavalry, zone out other cavalrymen and things like that. But yeah, you can decide what you want to do there. You can have a second company of the Muhad Berserkers, like maybe if your enemy is you're expecting them to be a little bit lower on the missile side of things, like maybe you're fighting against one of the Dwarven factions, for example, and yeah, you want to opt for a little bit more damage there with the Muhad Berserkers over the defensive power, the nice balanced kind of approach that the Southron Warband affords you, then that's an option for you as well. But yeah, it's a nice army. Give that last little bit there to our Black Serpent bodyguard, make them a little bit stronger. Got some strong lancers and some really nice range support in the form of the Haradrim Raiders, which is one of the things that Harad really lacks is melee cavalry. So a lot of your cavalry units are very swift and they're hard hitting, but they are vulnerable in cav-to-cav engagements. One of the possible exceptions to that rule is the Black Serpent bodyguards. Yes, they do have the -2 penalty versus horses that all lancers have, but their higher stats in general kind of makes up for it, and the 2 HP is obviously a great thing to have. So there you go, a little bit of a different Harad army with a bit more focus on the infantry, and some nice cavalry support as well, and yeah, some solid core of archers. So it's very balanced. But let's take a look at a Trollmen army. Let's say maybe you wanted to bring all of the Trollmen. You really want to kind of leverage the fear effects that Harad can bring to the table. Well, as a result, you are going to be a bit kind of strapped in terms of cavalry, so it might be an idea to go for a bit cheaper here. Instead of the Haradrim Raiders, you could go with the Southron Lancers, who, as I said, got a nice buff. They have 5 armor and 3 melee defense, which is a nice thing for them to have. So if you can get these guys on the charge, they can do decently for themselves, and yeah, really bring a lot of value. So let's go with a Lancer heavy approach here. A lot of fear effects. This is really going to be about breaking your enemy, all that shock damage and stuff like that. And let's bring a core here of the Haradrim Spearmen. Let's go for some cheaper Muhads, who are about 100 florins cheaper than the Serpent Guard. And maybe a couple Berserkers as well. And let's see here. We do have a lot of AP already in the form of the Trollmen of Harad. So let's see. We could eschew the Muhad Berserkers entirely, or just content ourselves to 2, and maybe go for kind of a cheaper archer approach. But no, I'm not quite satisfied with that. Let's maybe no, keep the 3 Southron warbands, and we'll go for a couple units of archers there, and maybe get ourselves some Hashari as well, which is kind of nice. And yeah, they're a decent little melee unit that can really tar pit and hold down the fort for a while. Got a fair amount of damage here in the form of these of the Trollmen, and the Muhad warriors also aren't bad. And if you want to give them an extra point of attack, well, that's pretty nice as well. I would even give that to the Hashari, and that leaves you with a fair amount of upgrades to throw on. Although we could get rid of the attack on the Hashari here and maybe give it to the Trollmen of Harad. That'd probably go a bit further. But yeah, you do have some archers here, a fair amount of archers that you can use to be a pain against your enemy. But this is much more, I would say, of a rush-focused army. You want to get in, use your Muhads, use the cost effectiveness of the Southron Warband to try and deal with your armored opponents, and then maybe even go in on the flanks with your Trollmen of Harad. Use the Demons of the Desert to try and snipe out some important units, and keep your Champions of Nafarot in the center to try and keep your units in line, because they do inspire, so they are going to go a long way to keeping the rest of them around. And then you have some Hashari for a little bit of extra killing power and tar pit ability, and of course you've got a fair amount of Lancers here to keep your enemy's cavalry as busy as possible. And I recommend supporting these guys when at all feasible with your Haradrim archers and your Southern archers, who can really do a lot of work for you. Let's go for maybe a siege-related army. Let's think about that. So Harad defending in a siege, we'll say. Trollmen are going to be obviously an important part of that. I would bring some Muhad Beast Tamers just because they're cheap and effective, and you can mix them with, say, a couple units of Serpent Guard. Maybe even pop in another unit of these guys. Defending archers, always a good thing to have. Although, if you are in a siege, maybe it would be a little bit better to go for a bit more balanced approach. A couple of South Run archers and 2 Muhad Beast Hunters instead of going for 3 archers, because you are going to have an ally to lean on. So it really depends on what your ally is going to be. And if you think that they're going to be bringing more archers, or maybe you can talk to them and tell them that you are going to go a little bit lighter on the archers, so they might be able to compensate for that with bringing an extra company or 2. Then that's something that obviously you can talk about, you can strategize. But this is a pretty strong core here. Now cavalry in a defensive siege, when people bring it, either it pays off tremendously, or it doesn't really do a whole lot. Like maybe they'll get some damage done, but they end up not. They're just being an expensive waste of money essentially, and then you're out that, and you don't have like infantry that could be useful later, or a company of archers, for example. So in this build, we're not going to go for any cavalry. We're going to assume, I think wisely, that if we're playing against experienced players, they're probably going to bring a unit or 2 of cavalry, and your cavalry will be pretty limited in what they can do because of that. So yeah, we're going to eschew cavalry entirely. Let's see here. Definitely want to go for some Muhad Berserkers. Do a ton of work in a choke point. Useful thing to have. Let's see, if you're in a defensive siege, a ballista can be useful, a catapult can of course be tremendously helpful, and that leaves us with about 1150 here. So let's we can get rid of the catapult and go for a ballista, which can be useful, or they can be not so great in a defensive siege. We could go for a couple companies there, the Southern Warband, which is more AP and more just cost efficient damage in general. We can give, oops, don't want to do that. Give the extra damage here to all of our armor-piercing units, just make them that much more deadly. And that's a decent Haradrim force right there, fairly versatile. You've got some options for sniping out enemy artillery, especially in the later stages when you get into like the final few choke points and the attackers are really leveraging their artillery because they've saved ammunition just for that purpose. Well, then a ballista is going to be a nice thing to have there. But of course, if you want to get rid of it, you can, and you can bring something else instead. Let's see, in a defensive siege, maybe it would be a good idea to bring your 2 companies to Southron Warband, but also to bring a unit of Rangers. Rangers are a great thing to have in a defensive siege, and you could swap the Rangers out with a company there of your Southron archers, but then you've only got the 1 unit of archers, so I recommend taking at least 2 archers, and then you've got, of course, your Muhad Beast Tamer hunters and stuff like that, which can be really, really deadly in choke points. Just got to save them for the end for when the enemy is running low on ammunition and supplies and stuff like that. And yeah, you got a couple variants there of a Harad kind of siege army, and Hashari Stalkers. Yeah, Rangers are a great thing to have in a siege, so I'd probably favor that over the ballista, just because the amount of damage that a Hashari Stalker can do is basically equivalent to what a ballista can do, or what an artillery piece can do under the right circumstances. So it's really down to you, I guess, in that kind of instance. But I do recommend bringing some Hashari Stalkers. But if you feel you need a ballista, that is an option available to you as well. But let's see here. Let's go with something with Mumakil. We haven't really done anything with the Mumakil so far. Let's go for something a little bit more, I guess, traditional. I mean, a Haradrim army with lots of Serpent Guard and Mumakil, lots of fast-moving units. A couple units of Trollmen in there, and that's going to be our core. We're going to try and build around this. So let's take 3 Southron Warbands. 2 Southron archers. Let's go for the 3 Southron archers. We can always swap that out later if we need to. And then we're going to want to build a cost-effective lineup here. So let's see, 3 Muhad warriors. We're not going to go with an army like this. I would honestly, again, I would be aggressive, and I would take the fight to my enemy, depending on what kind of enemy that I'm facing down. But let's say if I was fighting against Gondor or even Rune, for example, this is an army that I would probably take against them, just because I think that with all the armor piercing and stuff like that, and just the deadly Haradrim units in general, and the Mumakil, they don't. Well, Rune does have an answer to the Mumakil, Gondor doesn't, but there's no guarantee that they are going to bring the Sapphire Blazemen. I find them to be comparatively rare. So yeah, against factions like Rune or Harad or Umbar would be a good one to take this against too. I think you could do pretty well against Umbar with these guys. Yeah, it'd be a good thing to have. But, oops. Now let's take some Muhad Berserkers, a little bit of anti-armor there as well. And yeah, it's a decent little Haradrim kind of shock force that's you can use to break apart lines. That's really going to hinge on how well you use your Mumakil, because you are a little bit understaffed in terms of your cavalry, and your infantry line, and the rest of your army does kind of end up being a bit thin on the ground because of how expensive the Mumakil are. So they are an investment, so use them wisely. But this in my opinion, is a fairly decent Mumakil army that's like built around Mumakil being your killing power and your main kind of distraction, and then using some of your deadlier units here to yeah, try and overwhelm your enemies. So upgrades are also going to be important for this. You want to make sure that your infantry is as deadly as possible, right? So you're going to want to give these to all of your really hard-hitting units, and again to the Muhad warriors as well, just to make them a little bit more effective. And let's see here, we got one final bit of money to spend. We'll give that to one of the Serpent Guard just to make them a little bit stronger. So yeah, you could try that out. I think that would be decent, again, against factions like Gondor. Cardalin, this would probably do a lot of work against, just because Cardalin does rely on their skirmishers, and they do rely on their formations so much, especially armies that are built around, like Greenwatch Footmen, for example. Those really nice, cost-effective, cheap pikes that Cardalin can bring. Yeah, things like that. And there's a fair amount of fear in here as well. The Mumakil and the Trollmen of Harad smashing into a portion of the line together against Cardalin would almost certainly cause a rout, but you do need to worry about some of Cardalin's deadly skirmishers, and that's really what the Mumakil are going to be there for, to try and draw attention away from your army as the rest of your more lightly armored troops like the Muhad warriors and the Berserkers move in and try and get some work done. But yeah, really that's kind of the length and breadth of my ideas for Harad, at least in this case. I'm sure I can think of some more, and I'll add them to our challenge videos and stuff like that. But let's kind of summarize a little bit about Harad as a faction. So they are very lightly armored, as you've noticed. I'm sure if you've really taken a look at Harad's roster, about 8 armor I think is as good as it gets. There's only about 3 units that have it. One are the War Beasts, the other are Mumakil, and then you've got the Black Serpents. The Serpent Bodyguard have 7. They can be upgraded, and I recommend that if you have the funds and you want to put them in your army, if you want to build like a Serpent Guard army, that is totally viable in my opinion, that you upgrade the Serpent Guard, because they go from 7 to 9 armor, because armor upgrades are effectively 2 armor. They've also got an extra 1 skill that's not being shown there, so they'd have 9 armor, 5 skill, 5 shield, and 8 attack, which is good for a unit that costs 700. That is very, very nice indeed. And yeah, so if you wanted to build an army around them, that is possible. But yeah, most of their units are quite lightly armored, but they do hit reasonably hard. 6 AP damage on the Southron Warband is really, really nice. They're kind of like mini Flagrim in a way, but they do suffer a penalty against other infantry because of their spears. But still, very nice. Southron pikemen can be really, really strong when used at like kind of important points on a line. You can use these guys to really pressure more expensive units like Dwarven pikemen, for example. So a lot of Harad's army is quite cost-effective when used well, but they are, again, very vulnerable to being shot down with missiles. One of the advantages to playing as Harad is that you're quite fast. Look at a lot of their units here have higher than average speed, 1.05 instead of 1.0, which does make more of a difference than it sounds. Like 1.05 is actually noticeably faster. And yeah, so you're fast moving, you're hard hitting, you've usually got pretty decent morale. The Southron units have, I think it's 11. It's like 12 morale, actually, I think, across the board. Yeah, they all have 12 morale across the board, one of the other changes that they got. And even the Haradrim units here have like 8 morale. The Spearmen, I think, have 9 morale. And the Muhads, the really cheap ones, have like 14 morale. So you've got some staying power as Harad in terms of your morale, but your melee defense is lower, your shield is lower, and your armor is also lower. So that's one of the things to kind of watch out when you are being a Harad. And it really does push them to being a little bit more aggressive, I think, than other factions that can be a bit more defensive, like Cardalin. Yeah, Cardalin, I think, is a good kind of antithesis to Harad. They're a bit slower, more heavily armored, they got a little bit less morale, but they have a lot more going on in terms of their skirmishers. Their cavalry is a little bit better, especially in the cav-to-cav fight and that sort of thing. And actually, speaking of which, that's one of the other things that Harad lacks is solid melee cavalry. Most of their cav is either skirmish cav or their lancers, so you will suffer a little bit in cav to cav, so you need to be able to compensate for that with other things like your cheaper spears, your really cost-effective Southron Warband spears, the amount of archers that you can bring. Bringing 3 Southron archers is actually a really viable strategy. You can, of course, opt for a little bit more numbers and get 2 units of Haradrim archers, which is a bit more expensive than bringing a single unit of Southron archers. So you can get 3 Southron archers for cheaper than it would cost you to bring 4 of these, of this kind of split here. But I mean, that's really down to you. There's a lot of numbers that you lose out by doing that, so there is a choice to be made. But in any case, I've rambled on about this long enough. I think you guys kind of get the gist of Harad as a faction. And again, I really wanted to talk about these guys because of the big changes that they underwent. They're not just... It's not just a one-dimensional kind of thing. Like, these Southron units are not the end-all be-all of Harad's meta, which is, I think, a good thing. But in any case, my name is Jordan, also known as JMonster. I hope you guys found this useful. If you have any comments about, like, the format that I do this in, it's really very stream of consciousness, just me talking about ideas and throwing things out there and kind of seeing what sticks, and just bringing my perspective as somebody who works with the stats in Reforged and has spent a lot of time with the mod. Yeah, but if you guys would like to maybe see that change, or if you have more ideas for the format, then let me know and I can incorporate that into future videos. But in any case, my name is Jordan, also known as JMonster. Hope you guys enjoyed this, and I'll see you next time. Take care, everybody. Bye!